I'm Elizabeth Dondinell, licensed marriage family therapist from the East Bay Center for Anxiety, and I have my colleague here, Deb Palmer, who's in Missouri. And Deb, you want to tell us a little bit what you do and your license and so forth?
I am a licensed clinical social worker, but I have spent the last 25 years being a medical social worker in a hospital setting and outpatient clinics, primarily working with folks with a cancer diagnosis or some kind of chronic illness.
Yeah, 25 years working with that. Wow, you've got a knowledge base to work from, definitely. And that's one reason why, you and I were talking last week, and I so appreciate your time. And one reason I wanted to talk to you today is because, with the pandemic going on, one of the things that I'm really seeing both personally, professionally, as a result of this really traumatic event, and it's hit everybody on some level, whether you're, a doctor or work in a restaurant or a parent or a teen or a child. It's just across the board globally. Is one thing that we're starting to see now is noting what do we do with our elders, either when they have the coronavirus and they're passing away, or when they have a terminal illness such as cancer, and now we can no longer connect with them like we used to. And so I found the conversation that you and I had last week when I was asking you some questions about my own situation very inspiring. And that's what motivated me to bring you here today and ask you a couple of questions to kind of share with the people out there who are grappling with this issue of either a family member or loved one that's terminally ill, or a parent who is 65 or older or so and is either passing away from corona or some other situation where they are dying, and we can't do the rituals that we normally do. And how do we do this? I think there's many layers to it, and it's really starting to come up. I don't know if you've noticed that at all. Does it seem like it's arising more?
It is. I think in Missouri, we're not at the same peak that you are in California.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, they're predicting in the next couple of weeks we will have more of a surge of cases. But yes, we've already
Yeah.
experienced, because we've taken those precautions, limiting visitors, which I think has been the hardest thing for folks to grapple with, is that they cannot be as involved as they'd like in their loved one's care.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you speak a little bit more to that? That's one of the questions I was hoping to ask you and get some responses about. Is I know I'm going through it with my own mother, who is in a nursing care facility in Illinois, and she's now in quarantine. And the first week there was one corona, and now there's 10 in the last week.
Oh,
And,
wow.
those thoughts crossed my mind. And then I got the call from the nurse last week that said, we're doing everything we can, but if your mom gets it, she's very frail and she's not going to make it. She will die from it. And those are, really, that's very daunting words. And even more so, I was wondering, for example, in my situation, I have everything laid out. My mother, I know exactly what's going to happen when she passes. Papers are signed. We've had the hard discussions, but it really got me to thinking about, what if you haven't had those hard discussions? Or what if, like you said, there's still decisions to be made,
Mm-hmm.
right? Can you speak to a little bit about that, of as far as rituals, what do we do now? How do we grieve?
Okay. Well, let's see where I want to start with that question.
I know it was a
Um,
little mixed up, wasn't it?
um, no, there's just a lot there.
There is.
So kind of wanted to start from the beginning with, you're right. Most people do not think about any of these things that you and I have talked about until something happens, like they get a cancer diagnosis or they're in an accident or something like that. With the pandemic, it's made it really more in the forefront of people's minds, because it's in the news every day, and there's so much more conversation about it. So for folks that have a loved one in a hospital or a care facility and they can't be there, what I would recommend is you find some contact person So if it's the nurse, if it's the social worker, if it's in our hospital, it's called the patient experience office, someone that you can contact and get their phone number and be able to call them and get updates, or call the nursing station and ask for the physician to call back. And just know that they are busy, but they most likely will call you back.
Mm-hmm.
It's just sometimes it's hard for them to know who they need to speak with. And particularly now, we are asking that you designate one family member because they can't call all 5 kids.
Right.
And that is the kind of the spokesman that they're going to speak with and get their questions answered. So that's kind of where I start with folks.
Absolutely. If I could interrupt you, because
Sure.
you highlighted 4 steps, I think, that are really valuable, that I just want to summarize for
Sure.
people who are watching or listening, which is, in these situations with the pandemic, or if you're dealing with an elderly parent in a facility or hospital, really good idea to establish yourself with a contact person.
Right.
Like, for example, I know my mom's on the 2nd floor. I always call the 2nd floor nursing station. And I have a couple of nurses' names who I know their shifts, and I talk to them. So that's what you're talking about, right? Is to, to have your contact people, and to make sure you have the numbers so you can get updates. And that what I heard here is sometimes it requires a little patience to know that the doctor or nurse or your contact person will get back to you.
Right.
But right now they're dealing with so much. I know even the facility that my mom's at, they've sent out emails saying, please be patient. We're doing the best we can. The staff is overworked, essentially. They will get back to you. But if you don't have that communication, it's good to understand that they will get back, and there's just so much going on. And so then the other one, which I really liked what you said, when there's a multitude of family members, it's good to designate one family member right now, not have everybody calling repeatedly, or everyone talking to, 5 siblings talking to the same nurse. That it's good to have one family member designated at this point in time.
And honestly, that's good for any situation, but particularly now, that it's very helpful. And then whatever your situation, wherever your person is located, one of the things we had talked about is that so much of our assessment and being involved with a family member's care is visually seeing them. And you make your own kind of assessment of how someone's doing because you know them.
Right.
So you're more aware of the behavioral differences and how they look and how they say than maybe the healthcare, because there just has this one little period in time that they are looking at them or seeing them. So we are really trying to advocate, and I know it's not possible for everyone, but to do like the Zoom calls or the video conferencing, taking phones in so that family members can see their loved one, and even if the loved one can't communicate back. I've been on phone calls too where it's been the physician, the nurse, myself, the family member, particularly when the patient can't participate in that as well. But we've actually taken the computer into the room. Again, that depends on if it's someone with COVID-19 and the precautions that we'd have to do, that might be a little harder, but it still could. So far, we've found that it's worked pretty well, so that the families can have that. They can see.
Yeah. When we were talking the other day, that really that point I hadn't thought about, and now it makes so much sense. And then you've got me started talking to other people about this whole how we assess things visually when we want to make a decision often, especially decisions with our loved ones, or trying to discern their health if we're in charge of it, or just to find out what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, what part of the pandemic, it makes that difficult. Although the upside is, this is one of the values of technology, right? Is that facilities such as yourself are using FaceTime and iPads and whatever they can to try and make that visual. But yeah, without that, that's it. I wonder how that, and if it does impact the grieving process at times. And maybe that's a second part. You want to answer that later if you want.
Well, I think it does, because an example is you saw mom or dad or grandpa a month ago, and then your institution put in place the no visitor rule. Then grandpa gets sick in the nursing home and they send him to the hospital. And then you have people calling that you don't know, saying, he's really declined and he's having difficulties with this, and with all his other health concerns, we don't see him responding like we had hoped, and so we need to talk to you about what the goals of our care are. And that family member really struggled until we were able to do that video call. And once she saw them, she understood how much he had changed. And that it really helped with the one daughter when she said, "Oh, I didn't realize how much he had declined."
Exactly. Yeah. That visual is so, the perception as one passes is really so critical in how one will then grieve, and how kind of to tie up the ends and just be there. And that brings up that also, so not only having to assess as a loved one, sadly progresses, whether it's with a terminal illness or it's with corona, but then that the whole process that leads me into then when they do pass, if they pass during this time, it's not like you can, just hop over to the facility and pick up their things and can't be there and maybe holding their hand as they die, if that was something you imagined you were going to do. Or, for some people, they prefer to have the distance, which is okay also. But still, that the freedom, if you will, to choose in those moments isn't there. And then the lack of the visual assessment, right? And what you just brought up about when the woman finally got a picture of him on the iPad or whatever. I mean, just as you said that, I was thinking, oh, what a relief to be able to do that and could actually see what was going on, right? That really helps.
Yeah, I think that really helped her, and we ended up sending him back to his nursing home, but on hospice care. So, the visual, the grieving part is part of that. Technology is helping also in the sense that if they really, sometimes it's not because they can't visit, it's because they are right now, they can't go from one state to another.
Exactly, like myself.
I think we're at that point, but most people are staying where they're located. Right. So you may be able to have those conversations with your person, whether it's a phone or it's an iPad, or, being able to say what you need to say to them and say goodbye if you need to. So for the grieving part, that you can, maybe you're not physically going to be able to touch them,
right?
But you can talk to them.
Yeah. And how to do that? We were talking a little bit, and that those difficult conversations, I think you have some really good points about that too, if they haven't been said yet. is there value to do that now? And if so, how? I mean,
Well, when we think about difficult conversations, my mind is going in two different directions.
you're right. There's
So for the
many
first, the
difficult,
first
aren't there?
difficult conversation is just, I think, is having that conversation with the family member is if you are to get sick and you have to be placed on some kind of life prolonging medical mechanism, like the ventilators that they're talking about. Would you want that to happen? And based on someone's values and how of what they have about life, some are going to say yes, and some are going to say do it for a little while, and then if I don't improve, remove it. And knowing at that point you would most likely die. And that's a hard thing for people to, when they're healthy, or when they're sick, it's a hard thing to think about. And it's not a very fun
Pleasant,
conversation to
no.
have either.
So uncomfortable, yeah, awkward.
But it's really helpful for the family members that are able to have that conversation with their loved one, because then they know what they would want, and it takes some of that burden of that decision making off of them. So a lot of times we're saying, well, you're asking me to, and what we're just, and that's when we reflect back and say, if Joe was here now talking to us, what would he tell us?
Yeah.
Or we ask about their lifestyle. If he's going to have to continue to be on a ventilator for the rest of his life to live, and he can't go fishing, or he can't play with the grandkids, or he can't take himself to the bathroom, is that a kind of quality of life that he would accept?
Yeah.
And I think we should have those conversations way early before anybody gets sick, just to help your family members know what you would want if that ever happened.
Exactly. If I could interrupt you, because what's striking to me about what you're saying is there's great value. I mean, sometimes you just can't have them for whatever reason, whether it's family dynamics or whether it's a sudden death, or,
Right.
a lot of things happen. But the ability to try and have even like now, I imagine some people might be very hesitant with the pandemic and everything to want to go, so, if you do die, or what would you like for us to do at the end of this, or the end of your life passing? At the same time, from what you've said, I'm just, reminded that an image is a really powerful thing. And if a person has an image of their loved one after they passed, clearly based off of conversations they've had with them, like, yes, I'd like a memorial service. No, I don't want my obituary in the paper. And, even all those things. And so as the questions get asked, right, to them, either by the doctors or the nurses or the pastors or the, whatever it is, it would be nice that they could go kind of into their heart and their mind and go, oh, I remember that conversation. And this is what grandpa said. This is what mom said. And just to follow that, I think that, yeah, you're spot on. And yet it's difficult, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. It's a hard conversation to have. I mean, even with my own mother recently, when I was there and somehow it came up. So I just went with it. And my brother was there, and he's the power of attorney. And so I said, now, does he know where the will is or something? And she goes, oh yeah, he knows. And he goes, no, I don't.
Right.
And, she had this policy for her funeral. And I said, does he know where it's at? Well, she goes, yeah, he does. And he goes, no, I don't.
Exactly.
And so I think it's good too. I mean, this is kind of getting off a little bit, but it's good to have those conversations every so often.
Exactly. Well, I think what you bring up, that oftentimes the assumption is made, well, they know where all my stuff is. It's okay. And then you discover no, or you might think it is, and maybe it got moved or it got re-signed or something. And absolutely. Yeah.
Or my wife knows what I want, or my kids know what I want. And then you go talk to the family and they go, well, you never talked to us about this, so I don't know.
Right. And what a difficult, the whole conversation we're having is difficult. And so anybody watching or listening to this, I hope that, we recognize there's a heart and there's a mind thing going on here to even, wrap your brain around the perception that your loved one is dying, might die.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, having these conversations is so helpful,
Mm-hmm.
because once again, then you can kind of pull from that in your moment of grief, and you've got all these emotions after the person dies to be able to know, oh, mom said this, right? Okay, we're going to do this. So they don't really have to think about it. They can just do it. Yeah.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Then I'm kind of jumping to those conversations as the person is dying.
Yes,
And
that's
one
a
of the
whole other
things
good
that
thing.
I've been taught, and it's only if it kind of rings true to you, which can be done in person or over the phone. And I'm sure this is from somebody who's done research or on grief and dying, but it's it's to talk to them and to the person who's dying, and you can tell them that you love them.
Mm.
It's like, I love you. Please forgive me if that needs to be done. I
Mm.
forgive you if that needs to be done. Thank you and goodbye.
Mm. I love that. So four things I think to tell them that you love them, forgive them, what they mean to you, thank you, and goodbye.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
also, forgive me and I forgive you.
Forgive. Yeah. Forgiveness on both sides. Forgive me. I forgive you.
But only if that really rings true to you. I mean, sometimes there isn't any forgiveness. I mean, the relationship is good, and sometimes it's putting to peace something that has been there for a while.
Yeah. Yeah. That peace part is incredibly, those end of life conversations can be so valuable. And once again, coming back to that idea of creating that perception and the image, I myself, I know when my father passed, I had the privilege really to have that end of life conversation with him at the end. And, the beauty of that moment when he just looked at me and said, have I been a good father? And to be able to clearly and cleanly, because, we had rocky times, but to just say yes and just to see his face relax and that connection. And there was a moment of peace between us.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're so right, because then that's something I remember about his passing, which brings, kindness and compassion to my heart.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's what those end of life conversations can create, although it can be very difficult. And like you said, sometimes it isn't necessary, maybe, or sometimes it just isn't possible.
Right. Right. But
Yeah.
I think that's something that can be even a one-way conversation.
Yes, you're right. Mm-hmm.
So even if they can't respond back to you, it's something that you can say to them. And I think
Mm-hmm.
there's value in saying that to express that love and thanks or forgiveness to the person.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that point up. That is so right. So even I could see that, especially right now when, for example, if your loved one gets put on a ventilator, or they're on life support and they're going to be taken off and they can't respond, to be able to go through these questions, so tender hearted, but very powerful, about telling them that you love them, and the forgiveness and the thank yous and appreciations and goodbye. That's it's powerful just thinking about it. Yeah. And that one way is really okay.
Mm-hmm.
And do you find, is it, so let's say you can't do that as the person's passing, is it useful to do that afterwards in a letter, for example, or to write it down to the person?
Sure, sure. I think that is also useful. Um, Writing letters or journaling about your feelings, um, about their death event, um, or the letter to the person who's died,
Mm-hmm.
is also good. I think one of the things in terms of technology too that I've
Yeah.
discovered is a whole new thing of what they call digital storytelling,
Right. Yeah.
um, which I haven't quite I mean, I've seen one, but it talks about their experience providing their loved one's care,
Mm-hmm.
or their experience around that person's death, or it can be more focused on just that person and the things that you value about them. And putting that together, I think it's the same thing when you see a lot of funerals that have the video loops of the photos of the person throughout their lifespan.
Right.
It's bringing those memories and thoughts together and
Mm-hmm.
putting them in an organized fashion.
Right.
I think can be very healing to folks too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely healing it. I'm wondering if we could. This kind of leads into just that ritual. And you had last time we talked some good ideas or suggestions because, or right now the traditional rituals. I'm imagining, I think of like the people in Italy and Spain, and that have had large amounts of death and have very age-old organized rituals, and they can't happen right now. Right. And so how do we, I mean, it's really, this whole thing is causing us to think out of the box in so many ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is just another way of, what do? Don't just call up the funeral home and set the and say, okay, here,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to bring the casket or the urn or whatever, and we're going to have the service on this day with so and so. It's not happening.
Yeah. So what we're hearing now is, yes, because of the mandates that they can't do the traditional funeral where you bring
Right.
it, or the visitation where you have multiple people coming to um, witness your grief and
Yeah.
provide support to you. Again, this varies from areas of the country and to particular funeral services, or I mean, organizations. But they have gone from, where they would call, even from calling the family in and sitting down and talking to them, to doing it over the phone.
Mm.
I mean, even funeral,
Okay. So services over the phone, you're saying?
well, even to get it set up.
Uh-huh.
Um, one funeral home
Ah,
was
got it.
talking
Yeah.
about how they would bring the family in and they would offer them hot chocolate and cookies. And they said,
Right.
I mean, because they're trying to provide comfort and they can't even do that. I mean, even
Yeah.
the funeral industry is saying this doesn't feel right to us. We're
Mm.
not we're not providing the kind of service we want to provide to families for their loved ones. So yeah, they're having to do, out, like you said, out of this box thinking. And I remember the first time I noticed some funeral home was advertising that they were doing live streaming. I thought, oh my gosh, how impersonal.
Right.
And now, now you're going to be lucky to do
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
that. So I think they're looking at, just having services just for the immediate family. Um, and even with that, if you have a large family, you may not be able to do that either.
Right.
Or they'll just do the graveside services because you can be outside and further apart from each other.
Yeah.
We're going to look at different ways. Um, and I also think there might be some value, particularly for communities that have a lot of death, particularly to, well, I'm not even going to say Corona. I'm going to say any death that happens during this pandemic that changes how people function, to have a community service, to bring together the community um, as a whole, that we've all had to change how we do things. And how we said earlier, you talk to mom and dad and they say, oh, I want this and I want this, and you want to honor that. But now you might not be able to.
Yeah. Even
So
little things down to like, mom wanted roses at her funeral sort of thing, the types of flowers or the messages that were sent. I imagine the messages, the liturgies and things like that could be sent via, using technology, but
right.
you're right. That really, so if we do have that image and that, okay, it was talked about and there's this plan, and then what do you do if right now you may not be able to implement those little things or the big things,
And I
right?
just think it feels so unnatural to all of us because
Yeah, it
this is not
does.
how we want to do things.
Right. I like that you've used that word a couple of times, and I think that's spot on, that description, especially in these kinds of rituals that are age old and, weddings and funerals bring families together, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's one of the
Mm-hmm.
phrases I grew up with, right? And
Right.
so this is a moment when families come together and they have for centuries in
Mm-hmm.
a similar way. And now we really, thinking out of the box and that experience of it just feeling unnatural, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
hmm And yet there are ways to do it. And you brought up that nice example of even how a church service was going on. I'm wondering if you have other suggestions. You had some other ideas last time we talked about some rituals, something you mentioned a blue Christmas. I was kind of curious about, and what
Well,
is that?
yeah, that's kind of going back to the community wide. The Blue Christmas, as my understanding, is done traditionally around the Christmas holiday,
hmm
and the Jewish holiday too. I can't remember. It's starting before that, just so people that are normally that this is like a party kind of time and loving
Right.
time and family time, and you're grieving the loss of someone that you've lost this in the past year, is bringing that group of folks together to support one another during that
hmm
time. Some other things that you could do is I read recently where someone's um, family member went by the nickname of Bear.
hmm
So they did a teddy bear drive in his name
Right.
for
hmm
a children's hospital. Um, my father was a farmer and had sheep.
Mm.
And so when after his death, we instead of getting gifts for each other, we gave our money to an organization that purchased sheep and livestock for third world countries.
Right. Yeah, we've done that for Christmas stuff. Exactly.
Yeah. So I mean, it's otherwise. I mean,
There's so many
trying to think
opportunities
of
to give here, possibly. Yeah.
right somehow to remember that person, to honor
hmm
them, and to give back at the same time. I mean, or just like my grandmother's birthday is coming up, and she loved cherry nut cake, so I may make a cherry nut cake in her honor.
Right.
Or my father-in-law was a big 7-7 drink and a certain kind of fried onion rings. So occasionally when it's his birthday, but none of us like 7-7, but we'll
We
invite
go
him
to
out
the onion
anyway.
rings, right?
And we'll eat the onion ring.
Right.
But it's different ways to acknowledge that person and their presence and how important they were in our lives.
Exactly. And I think that's the point here, isn't it? So for us to circle back around, and both of us are like looking at our family memories, but the salient point is the value of having these little rituals, like you said, of the one thing you remember about the person,
Mm-hmm.
and being able to carry that on uh, for a while, or for the, as a celebration for the rest of your own life. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
it just depends. But the onion rings and the cherry cake and things like that. And you also mentioned, it makes you think, you had mentioned some cool things, like I think at your facility you said you did sometimes handprints of loved ones. Can
Right.
speak more about some of those things, Bez?
Okay. So, depending if the family would like, we can try to make handprints, which is basically finger paint and
Mm-hmm.
putting their hand on a piece of paper, and then it has a saying at the bottom if they would like. Um, can't always say they look very professional, but immediately after grief, some people really like that. There's their hand.
Oh, yeah.
On a piece of paper. They can see it, they can touch it, and it brings comfort to them.
Yeah.
Sometimes we've actually done it with the patient's hand and like the wife's hand overlapping.
Mm.
Sometimes we've brought, when there's children, young children, we've had them come in and put their hand with the patient's hand as well,
Mm-hmm.
to create something for the immediate that they can have, and it represents their parent. You can buy, if you know ahead of time, there's companies that you can get clay and you can make, they do this a lot for infants, but I've actually now started getting it for adults, and you can make a fingerprint and make it in a charm that they can wear as a piece of jewelry.
Right. Okay.
That you have to think ahead of.
Right.
Not all hospitals have that
Mm-hmm.
available, and of course there's cost to it. You know, using paint and a piece of paper doesn't cost much, but that's obviously costs you more.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked to folks about um, if there was a certain piece of clothing that was really important to that person that has died, if they can make it into um, a Christmas ornament, or if it's large enough, they can make, not they can make, but maybe they can make, or
Have
they
it
can have
made.
someone else make like a teddy bear or stuffed animal.
Right.
They can make quilts.
So I'm going to interrupt you for a moment, Deb, because I think these are fabulous ideas, but my brain goes into we're in a pandemic.
Right.
And how could people, I mean, would a hospital like such as your facility actually hold on to someone's clothing for a while? Or
I meant
stuffed
clothing that
animal?
they had at home.
They had at home. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because
So,
usually
I
when
mean,
they're in the hospital, they're in a gown.
right, right.
They
I
walk
guess where I
around.
was thinking of a nursing facility such as my mom, but I know,
Oh,
I'm imagining those things. Yeah, how do you like get those things in this stage? There probably isn't. I've been told they have a protocol, but you're right. It would be things that they already have like, at home.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and those take time to make, and
Yeah,
find the people, and that kind of thing. Those are for as time goes on. It's just something that you can do to help with the bereavement process. Not
mm-hmm.
that you might do it right away.
Exactly. Some of this takes time. I'm glad you brought that up. That because I was thinking as you were talking that maybe some people who are listening or watching, I wouldn't want them to be overwhelmed with, oh, great, this is another thing I have to do.
Oh, no, no, no,
This isn't
no.
at all. These are just suggestions. And, the first year of grief, a lot is when a lot of this gets done over that year's time,
Correct,
right?
correct. Yes, that's a very good point. Yeah.
It's not something that happens immediately. Or just asking you a question like, we've talked about some of the components of grief and the importance of making memories and how we're having to think out of the box for rituals that normally help us grieve. And then there's this other thing that's, kind of floating around, and maybe some people are thinking about that often comes in a pandemic time or a time like this when we're anticipating people dying, and there's this experience of anticipatory grief. Is there anything we should know that's important about that, or just is it valuable just to note it?
Well, when I think about anticipatory grief, I kind of think we're all as a country in
Yeah.
that right now, because we are anticipating people dying, and we are anticipating, and we don't know if it's going to be someone that we know,
So
someone in
true.
our family, or just our community. And so I think we're kind of, as a nation, as a country, we're in that phase.
Even as the world, probably, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In a world that isn't kind of not, um, and we're not used to this being so, all the word I can think of right now is massive.
Yeah.
Um, but when it's, when you have someone in chronic illness or a terminal diagnosis, you can see their decline, and or a dementia, you can see the decline happening, and you grieve those losses as you see them happening. And I
Yeah.
kind of think of that as anticipatory grief as well. Um, you experience the grief of the physical symptoms and, like the headaches and the backaches and the stomach aches, and then sometimes, or the chest and its pain and it's the anxiety of fearing something that's going to happen that you don't want to happen.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that whole you're losing. I mean, with grief, it's the loss of something, and we've lost the way we work, we shop,
Yeah.
we communicate with people. There's so many things that we've had to change.
Right.
I keep hearing, I'll be happy when we can go back to the way it was before.
Mm-hmm.
And then I hear, oh, it's never going to go back to the way it was before. So it's just that uncertainty right now
Mm-hmm.
of what we may lose and what we may get to keep.
Exactly, because in those two statements, there's truth in both of them, right?
Right.
They're a little they're one or the other, but the truth is that when we go back, some things will be the same as before, and other things won't return to the way they were before. Right. And we just don't know what is what.
And that's the one thing that you said that I thought was really interesting is like, we didn't expect it, and all of a sudden I have to make all these changes, and the world still moves on. And that's kind of what grief is. I mean, the death happens, you don't want it, your life changes, but the world still goes on.
Right.
And you have to figure out how to continue to live with the changes in your life.
Absolutely. And part of that world that's going on is the whole process of life and death, is the whole process of us, still needing, for example, dental appointments, medical appointments, having to go to the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
We still need electricity. We got to pay the bills. If we don't suddenly have a job now, how does that all continue to go on in this space of the pandemic? Mm-hmm. Right. And so as we're talking, and I don't want to get into all the layers of it, but there's a certain level of grief that's going on for many things, not just for our loved ones. Right.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Well, is there anything else you want to add? I mean, I really liked you went through, as far as just from the basics, from the beginning of what do you do when a loved one is in the hospital, and the 4 steps on how to find that contact person and get that. And then really nice nugget there about how do you say goodbye, and sometimes it's one-sided, sometimes it's in a letter, but to make sure that you tell them that you love them if you're able to, and the forgiveness both ways if possible, and the thank yous and the goodbyes and appreciations is tremendously valuable. And some really nice ideas of how, and the value and the importance of how to prepare oneself for the inability sometimes to make a visual assessment either of your loved one as they're going through an illness process. And they may look very different now than they did a month ago, right? Mm-hmm. And then how and the value of using technology in those situations to try and get a visual assessment when some hard decisions need to be made, and importance of trying to have, if you haven't had them, to have some of those hard conversations or difficult conversations, whether it's being on life support or whether it's, gosh, we're in this time and we don't know what your funeral is going to look like. What do you think, Mom or Grandpa, if they're able to say something to the difficult conversations of the saying goodbye to your loved one. Right. Yeah, you covered a lot for us. I appreciate it. Is there anything else you'd want to add to any of this as we talked?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I mean, I'll probably think of something after we hang up, but.
Right, isn't it the case? Okay. Well, I really, I want to thank you for your time. And once again, this is Deb Palmer. She's a licensed medical social worker. She's been doing it for 25 years in Missouri with terminally ill. And myself, I'm Elizabeth Dondanell, a licensed marriage family therapist, and I am here with a clinical group practice of East Bay Center for Anxiety Relief, and we're here in California. I just wanted to bring this, and put this out on Facebook and LinkedIn and a few places to people. I thought this conversation might be helpful for some. I know these are questions that were myself and, other people are starting to grapple with. the long distance, or just how do we grieve in this time of pandemic with our loved ones and some of the complications that brings. And so I hope that you find this helpful as a viewer. And if you like it, give us a like. If you have any other thoughts or ideas how we might further some of the information to get it out there and you found this useful, please let me know in the feedback box there. And I appreciate that. Thanks.
Thanks.
All right.